Welcome to the Fintech Times News and Views podcast. Established in 2016, the Fintech Times is a global multimedia news outlet centered around the world's first leading fintech newspaper. We report on the latest and brightest ideas from the fintech world. Follow the conversation using hashtag TFD News and Views and follow us at the Fintech Times. Hello, and welcome back to the Fintech Times News and Views podcast brought to you by Vanta. Vanta helps you save time, money, and build customer trust, all by centralizing program requirements and evidence collections and frameworks like Dora. If you want to manage risk and improve security, then head to vanta.com/fintechtimes to learn more. But we are back once again to talk about fintech. Sadly, we are a host down this week, as Tom could not make it. But Francis, it is a pleasure, as always, to have you here to talk about fintech with you. I mean, how's your week going? How's it been?
It has been a good week, a nice busy week, and we've had a lot of interesting news, a good variety of coverage across the different regions. So yeah, no, it's been a good week. How about yourself?
Yeah, no, pretty good here as well. I always think that expected to go quieter in the run up to Easter, but maybe we'll get that next week as we get into the bank holidays. But yeah, like you say, it's been a really nice busy week with plenty to talk about. So what article are you bringing today?
So today I wanted to talk about Pix and the new features that have been released by the Central Bank of Brazil.
Amazing. And I'm going to be talking about a new partnership between ClearBank and Capital on Tap in order to give small businesses a little bit of a boost. But anyway, Francis, I'm going to let you go first this week. So why don't you take it away?
Yeah, absolutely. So I chose the article today because I feel like when we talk about Pix, a lot of the time we're talking about organizations, like not the central bank, like organizations in the region, or even those outside that are working on the payment method and trying to find new ways of making it useful. You know, I remember we've seen international Pix and Pix roaming. I believe that was from Pag Brazil. But yeah, we see a lot of different organizations working with the payment method. But it's nice to see that the central bank, the one in charge of it all, is still looking to make new improvements and is working on, you know, it's not sort of just being reactive, I suppose, and sort of sitting and waiting to see how the demand for it changes. It's actually responding to it and, you know, proactively making changes. So a new announcement which was made on the central bank's YouTube channel to just a few members, in fact, I know that it was a very exclusive announcement. It revealed that there's going to be 4 new features coming to Pix as part of the offering, and that is Pix installments, sort of a BNPL alternative, if you will, Pix under warranty, the Pix transaction disputes, and Pix scheduling. And a lot of these announcements actually come to sort of help with security and ensuring that both buyer and seller are aware and have control over their transactions to make sure that everything is made by them and that fraudsters aren't getting a hold of their details or anything like that. But the main one that I wanted to talk about today was the Pix installments feature called Pix Parcelado. And essentially what this is a pay over time functionality for Pix, which will allow users to use credit to pay for a Pix transaction. The recipient will have access to the full amount instantly, but the payer will be able to pay for it in installments. This functionality has the potential to stimulate the use of Pix in retail for the purchase of higher value goods and services, benefiting those who do not have access to this type of operation. It will be made available to the population and retailers from September 2025. And yeah, the reason that I wanted to talk about this is obviously we've seen the hype of BNPL. I think it was last week actually we were speaking that it's, you know, it's not the top thing anymore, but it's still very relevant. I feel like a lot of people still use it, but specifically in a region like Brazil where the vast majority of people are using Pix, will people be less inclined to get these other apps and other sort of financial services? Well, just these different financial services, if they've already got everything that they want to use in like the Pix app itself. So that's kind of what I wanted to discuss really. Do you think that the BNPL space is almost in a little bit of jeopardy now if Pix Parcelado is successful?
I think that is a really interesting question, and one that I really like that sort of the train of thought that you've gone down there, and the possibility that we have here. I think this kind of new, I guess I also find it interesting that it's like pay over time, that we're kind of almost rebranding buy now pay later in a really weird way, because I think there's still quite a lot of negative connotations with buy now pay later that I don't think, even though it is now a very much part and parcel of sort of everyday payments life, as we said, was it last week? I think buy now pay later still has quite a lot of like negative connotations with it. And so the kind of this idea of calling it pay over time, that sounds, that's new, that's exciting, that's quite interesting, I think. And I wonder if you're right in that we will start to see a bit of a decline for the buy now pay later providers, because I think, the real charm of buy now pay later was that it was something that the banks weren't doing, right? It was, you had to turn to these alternative providers to get this alternative payment method, because it was something that your regular incumbent banks were just not doing. They didn't have, they could do traditional credit, they could give you a credit card, they could give you a loan, but in terms of those, small everyday purchases that, that buy now pay later is so popular and so good for, they didn't really have that functionality. And so to kind of see that in Pix coming out of it, and using it for these sorts of transactions, and being able to, give access to this to a lot more people and a lot more retailers, I think is really interesting. And I think, being able to stimulate the use of Pix within retail for, goods and services, and I guess high value goods and services, higher value, I should say, I think will be really interesting. And yeah, I'm really excited to see this is happening. I don't necessarily think it's gonna be the end of like buy now pay later. Like, are we gonna see things drip off? I don't know. But that being said, that I think we've learned quite, quickly in fintech, things change so much, and things change. Sometimes things change quickly, and sometimes things change slowly. So I think it'll be interesting to see what this effect will have on everything. But I'm really happy to see that more people are kind of taking these sorts of solutions and working on them still. Like the buy now pay later hype may have died down a little bit over the past couple of years, but it is still a really useful tool, and it's a really useful financial offering that I think a lot of people, especially when you think about sort of like the current climate in the economy, I think a lot of people still find those solutions really useful, even if the buzz has died down a little bit. And we've talked before about the possible pitfalls of buy now pay later, so I won't get into them now. But I'm really glad to see that people are still working on this kind of functionality and this kind of pay later style of products. I think it's still relevant in today's society. So yeah, really interesting.
No, 100%. And I think you're absolutely right. And I think it might be interesting to see how users experience sort of a pay over time functionality and realize actually this is very usable. And I understand it now a little bit better because it's already embedded in a platform that I use on a near day-to-day basis. And I think because of that, that might actually see, BNPL services grow a little bit, in fact, users will be like, I now know what it is. Let me see what other offerings are out there that, might give me better savings or something like that. So yeah, I think you're absolutely right. And I think obviously it's still quite a few months away, launching in September, but I think it will be, it will be an interesting scenario in Brazil to see how the payment ecosystem, I suppose, evolves, especially considering how quickly everything else has evolved in the region itself. So yeah, no, I think it's definitely one to keep an eye on. But with that, why don't we go to your article?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Francis. So I guess kind of similar, but also not really similar at all, but hey ho. Basically, my article is all about how small businesses are hopefully going to benefit from higher interest on savings as ClearBank is partnering with Capital on Tap. So basically, ClearBank is looking to launch a new embedded banking service for small businesses, credit card provider Capital on Tap. So this partnership between the two companies will see ClearBank providing business savings accounts integrated directly into Capital on Tap's existing user portal. Capital on Tap are a small business credit card provider, by the way. So basically, it's kind of putting it all together as an embedded finance offering. And as a result, both new and existing customers are going to benefit from higher interest rates on their savings, as well as eligible deposits protected by FSCS when using a business saving account. So I just thought this was a really interesting thing that I wanted to talk about today, because I think, we talk about a lot about, small businesses being really important to the economy and how fintech can really help provide, support to those small businesses. And I think this is just a really nice example of that, and having a business saving account to be able to, make through your existing Capital on Tap portal means that you've got the flexibility to deposit funds from your bank account, earn interest, and, have that peace of mind that they can instantly draw the funds when they need them. That's kind of the whole thing that ClearBank and Capital on Tap are really pushing, and really pushing this kind of potential of embedded finance. And I guess the other reason I wanted to bring this up today is because I feel like the whole embedded finance scenario has gone a little bit quiet lately. I don't know if you found this as well, Francis. It could just be my own experience, but I feel like we've not heard too much from the embedded finance world recently. I think there's been a lot of big trends in fintech that have been happening. And I think, because embedded finance was such the buzzword, previously, and it's been such a big thing that everyone's really been trying to push. So I thought it was really interesting to see this come up today. And I think it's also really exciting to kind of have a really good use case for embedded finance, especially when we think about supporting a niche, in this case, small businesses. So, to be able to, have ClearBank to grow their embedded banking capability and, expand their customer offering whilst partnering with Capital on Tap to create these secure savings accounts, I think is really awesome. And I think it's a really cool thing to see within fintech, and just something to, I guess, kind of get excited about. So, I mean, I just kind of wanted to bring you into this and see what you think. Obviously, I think there's a lot of prongs to this, but in general, like, having a high interest savings solution for small businesses can only be a good thing. And I think to be able to, see fintech coming together to work on a better finance solution and bring it to market, just to me sounds pretty good. But I'd love to know your thoughts. What do you think?
Yeah, I think with this sort of thing, I think embedded finance, especially, like, one of its biggest things is about sort of giving users flexibility. I think the whole point is that it's meant to make life really simple and, like, almost everything integrated quite nicely, to the point that, it's seamless. I think that's the biggest selling point with embedded finance in general, not just embedded banking, but embedded finance is it's meant to be this seamless, like, easy to use feature. And I think that, as it says in the article, that this gives customers the flexibility to deposit funds from their nominated bank account and earn daily interest with the peace of mind that they can instantly withdraw the funds when they need them. I think that's especially helpful because it gives, well, as it says there, it gives them the peace of mind that, on a rainy day, if it's necessary, and if, a deal doesn't go through, or whatever it might be, that the funds are available in there. It sort of averts this sort of panic station mentality that could very easily be adopted if something doesn't go the way it's supposed to. But just in general, sort of on the embedded finance sector, and I suppose you're right, we haven't really seen it that much, or seen it spoken about that much lately. And I do think it's just because of AI, to be honest. I know this isn't sort of a hot take and that everyone knows it, but AI is just, ever since it sort of burst onto the scene a few years ago, it really has just stuck. And it sort of seems like everything now, every sort of big announcement really revolves around it, to the point that it's getting a little bit boring and repetitive now. So it's nice to see that, we are still seeing these other technologies developed. And I mean, like last week, for example, we were talking about blockchain getting the same treatment as AI. So it's nice that now we're looking at embedded finance, like you said, another area that a few years ago was really popular. And it, like you say, it has sort of, it probably hasn't actually fallen to the wayside. It's just that we're not hearing about it as much. But yeah, as you say, the actual launch of the service of this new partnership, I think it's great. And I think that, again, like you said, it's brilliant to see that, good interest and high interest rates are very readily sort of accessible. And, as organizations look to grow in the UK, especially startups, like the article says, they're the backbone of the UK's economy. And the more support that they have, the better, the better it is for everyone. So no, I think it's a great thing and a great service launch in general.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you've pretty much summed up everything that I have been thinking, and you're totally right. Like AI is just taking over everything, and I didn't want to say that sort of explicitly, but you're absolutely right. Like everything's just so AI right now that other things I think are being not necessarily put on the back burner, but just not in the same kind of public eye as before. So I think it's always cool to see, especially even because a few years ago, like embedded finance was the thing. Like every conference you went to, every person you spoke to, it was all about embedded finance and those kind of options. So yeah, just a really nice thing to talk about today. But anyway, that does bring us to the end of our discussion today. Thank you so much, Francis, for bringing your article and talking to me about things. If you want to hear any more about anything we've spoken about today, head on over to thefintechtimes.com, where there are plenty more news and insights over there. But very quickly, let's do what I learned this week. So each week, being on the Fintech Times editorial team, we are learning so much about the fintech world that we thought it would be fun to share that with our listeners. So, Francis, what have you learned this week?
What I learned this week really felt like a blast from the past. It was all about El Salvador, and that, in fact, BitGet, the cryptocurrency exchange and Web3 company, has secured a digital asset service provider license from El Salvador's National Commission of Digital Assets, expanding its regulatory framework within the country. And yeah, I remember a few years ago when El Salvador announced that Bitcoin was going to be one of its national currencies, and that was sort of all that we were talking about. And so, yeah, no, it's interesting to see that that scene is still evolving in the country, and yeah, looking forward to see what happens next.
Yeah, that's really awesome. I do remember that and having all those conversations and things. So yeah, that's really cool. What I learned this week is that a new survey from Access PaySuite has found 30% of Gen Z students are not carrying cash anymore, with 39% favoring digital wallets. And I feel like a lot kind of that is a kind of a bit of like, well, yeah, obviously, but it's really interesting to see that the surveys are kind of like confirming things, and kind of what that means for the payment industry. I guess we'll see as everything plays out over the next months or years, etc. But anyway, Francis, thank you so much for joining me today. It has been great chatting with you. Sad that we sadly do not have Tom today, but I'm sure we'll all be back together again talking about fintech very, very soon. So thanks so much, and I will catch you on the next one.
See you next week.
Thanks for listening to the Fintech Times News and Views podcast. Don't miss next week's episode and continue the conversation using hashtag TFT News and Views and follow us at the Fintech Times.